Welcome back to The Children of the New Forest, written by Frederick Marryat, a historical novel, and this is part 2. Let's listen together.
Chapter 7. Humphrey was now after something else. He had made several traps, and brought in rabbits and hares almost every day. He had also made some bird traps, and had caught 2 goldfinches for Alice and Edith, which they put in the cages he had made for them. But, as we said, Humphrey was about something else. He was out early in the morning, and in the evening, when the moon was up, he came home late, long after they had all gone to bed, but they never knew why, nor would he tell them. A heavy fall of snow took place, and Humphrey was more out than ever. At last, about a week after the snow had lain on the ground, one morning he came in with a hare and rabbit in his hand, and said, "Edward, I have caught something larger than a hare or a rabbit, and you must come and help me, and we must take our guns. Jacob, I suppose your rheumatism is too bad to let you come too." "No, I think I can manage. It's the damp that hurts me so much. This frosty air will do me good, perhaps. I have been much better since the snow fell. Now, then, let us see what you have caught." "2 will have to walk 2 miles, said Humphrey, as they went out. "I can manage it, Humphrey, so lead the way." Humphrey went on till they came close to a clump of large trees, and then brought them to a pitfall which he had dug, about 6 feet wide and 8 feet long, and 9 feet deep. "There's my large trap," said Humphrey, "and see what I have caught in it." They looked down into the pit and perceived a young bull in it. Smoker, who was with them, began to bark furiously at it. "Now, what are we to do?" "I don't think it is hurt." "Can we get it out?" said Humphrey. "No, not very well. If it was a calf we might, but it is too heavy, and if we were to get it out alive, we must kill it afterwards, so we had better shoot it at once." "So I think," replied Humphrey. "But how did you catch him?" said Edward. "I read of it in the same book I did about the traps for hares," replied Humphrey. "I dug out the pit and covered it with brambles, and then put snow at the top. This is the thicket that the herd comes to chiefly in winter time. It is large and dry, and the large trees shelter it, so that is why I chose this spot. I took a large bundle of hay, put some on the snow about the pit, and then strewed some more about in small handfuls, so that the cattle must find it and pick it up, which I knew they would be glad to do, now that the snow is on the ground. And now, you see, I have succeeded." "Well, Humphrey, you beat us, I will say," said Edward. "Shall I shoot him?" "Yes, now that he is looking up." Edward shot his ball through the forehead of the animal, which fell dead, but they were then obliged to go home for the pony and cart, and ropes to get the animal out of the pit, and a hard job they had of it too, but the pony helped them, and they did get it out at last. "I will do it easier next time," said Humphrey. "I will make a windlass as soon as I can, and we will soon hoist out another, like they turn a bucket of water up from a well." "It's nice young meat," said Jacob, who was skinning the bull, not above 18 months old, I should think. "Had it been a full-grown one, like that we shot, it must have remained where it was, for we never could have got it out." "Yes, Jacob, we should, for I should have gone down and cut it up in the pit, so that we would have handed it out by bits, if we could not have managed him whole." They loaded the cart with the skin and quarters of the animal, and then drove home. "This will go far to pay for the gun, Humphrey," said Jacob, "if it don't pay for more." I'm glad of it, said Humphrey, but I hope it will not be the last which I take. That reminds me, Humphrey, of one thing dash. I think you must come back with the cart and carry away all the entrails of the beast, and remove all the blood which is on the snow, for I've observed that cattle are very scared with the smell and sight of blood. I found that out by once or twice seeing them come to where I have cut the throat of a stag, and as soon as they have put their noses down to where the blood was on the ground they have put their tails up and galloped away, bellowing at a terrible rate. Indeed, I've heard say that if a murder has been committed in a wood, and you want to find the body, that a herd of cattle drove into it will serve you better than even a bloodhound. Thank you for telling me that, Jacob, for I should never have supposed it, and I'll tell you what I'll also do. I'll load the cart with fern litter, and put it at the bottom of the pit, so that if I could get a heifer or calf worth taking, it may not be hurt by the fall. It must have taken you a long while to dig that pit, Humphrey. Yes, it did, and as I got deeper the work was harder, and then I had to carry away all the earth and scatter it about. I was more than a month about it from the time that I began till it was finished, and I had a ladder to go up and down by at last, and carried the baskets of earth up, for it was too deep to throw it out. Nothing like patience and perseverance, Humphrey. You've more than I have. I'm sure he has more than I have, or shall ever have, I'm afraid, replied Edward. During this winter, which passed rapidly away, very few circumstances of any consequence occurred. Old Jacob was more or less confined to the cottage by the rheumatism, and Edward hunted either by himself or occasionally with Humphrey. Humphrey was fortunate enough to take a bull and cow-calf in his pitfall, both of them about a year or 15 months old, and by a rude invention of his, by way of windlass, contrived, with the assistance of Edward, to hoist them uninjured out of the pit. They were put into the yard, and after having been starved till they were tamed, they followed the example of the heifer and calf, and became quite tame. These were an important addition to their stock, as may well be imagined. The only mishap under which they labored was old Jacob's confinement to the cottage, which, as the winter advanced, prevented him from going to Lymington. They could not therefore sell any venison, and Humphrey, by way of experiment, smoked some venison hams, which he hung up with the others. There was another point on which they felt anxiety, which was, that Jacob could not cross the forest to get the puppies which had been promised them, and the time was past, for it was now January, when he was to have called for them. Edward and Humphrey pressed the old man very hard to let one of them go, but the only answer they could obtain was, that he'd be better soon. At last, finding that he got worse instead of better, he consented that Edward should go. He gave directions how to proceed, the way he was to take, and a description of the keeper's lodge, cautioned him to call himself by the name of Armitage, and describe himself as his grandson. Edward promised to obey Jacob's directions, and the next morning he set off, mounted upon White Billy, with a little money in his pocket, in case he should want it. "I wish I was going with you," said Humphrey, as he walked by the side of the pony. "I wish you were, Humphrey. For my part, I feel as if I were a slave set at liberty. I do justice to old Jacob's kindness and goodwill, and acknowledge how much we are indebted to him, but still, to be housed up here in the forest, never seeing or speaking to anyone, shut out from the world, does not suit Edward Beverley. Our father was a soldier, and a right good one, and if I were old enough I think even now I should escape and join the royal party, broken as it may be, and by all accounts is, at this moment. Deerstalking is all very well, but I fly at higher game." "I feel the same as you do," replied Humphrey, "but recollect, Edward, that the old man's very infirm, and what would become of our sisters if we were to leave them?" "I know that well, Humphrey. I have no idea of leaving them, you may be sure, but I wish they were with our relations in safety, and then we should be free to act." "Yes, we should, Edward, but recollect that we are not yet men, and boys of 15 and 13 cannot do much, although they may wish to do much." "It's true that I am only 15, replied Edward, "but I am strong enough, and so are you. I think if I had a fair cut at a man's head, I would make him stagger under it, were he as big as a buffalo. As young as I have been to the wars, that I know well, and I recollect my father promising me that I should go with him as soon as I was 15. "What puzzles me," replied Humphrey, "is the fear that old Jacob has of our being seen at Lymington." "Why, what fear is there?" "I cannot tell more than you. In my opinion, the fear is only in his own imagination. They surely would not hurt us, if we walked about without arms like other people, because our father had fought for the king? That they have beheaded some people is true, but then they were plotting in the king's favor, or in other ways opposed to Parliament. This I have gathered from Jacob, but I cannot see what we have to fear, if we remain quiet. But now comes the question, Edward, for Jacob has, I believe, said more to me on this one subject than he has to you. Suppose you were to leave the forest, what would be the first step which you would take?" "I should of course state who I was, and take possession of my father's property at Arnwood, which is mine by descent." "Exactly, so Jacob thinks, and he says that would be your ruin, for the property is sequestered, as they call it, or forfeited to the Parliament, in consequence of your father having fought against it on the king's side. It no longer belongs to you, and you would not be allowed to take it. On the contrary, you would in all probability be imprisoned, and who knows what might then take place. You see there is danger." "Did Jacob say this to you?" "Yes, he did. He told me he dare not speak to you on the subject, you were so fiery, and if you heard that the property was confiscated you would certainly do some rash act, and that anything of the kind would be a pretense for laying hold of you. And then he said that he did not think that he would live long, for he was weaker every day, and that he only hoped his life would be spared another year or two, that he might keep you quiet till better times came. He said that if they supposed that we were all burnt in the house when it was fired, it would give them a fair opportunity of calling you an impostor, and treating you accordingly, and that there were so many anxious to have a gift of the property that you would have thousands of people compassing your death. He said that your making known yourself and claiming your property would be the very conduct that your enemies would wish you to follow, and would be attended with most fatal consequences. For he said, to prove that you were Edward Beverley, you must declare that I and your sisters were in the forest with him, and this disclosure would put the whole family in the power of their bitterest enemies. And what would become of your sisters, it would be impossible to say, but most likely they would be put under the charge of some Puritan family, who would have a pleasure in ill-treating and humiliating the daughters of such a man as Colonel Beverley. And why did he not tell me all this? He was afraid to say anything to you. He thought that you would be so mad at the idea of this injustice that you would do something rash, and he said, I pray every night that my otherwise useless life may be spared, for, were I to die, I know that Edward would quit the forest. Never, while my sisters are under my protection, replied Edward. Were they safe, I would be out of it tomorrow. I think, Edward, that there is great truth in what Jacob says, you could do no good, for they would not restore your property, by making your seclusion known at present, and you might do a great deal of harm. Bide your time, is good advice in such troubled times. I therefore think that I should be very wary if I were you, but I still think that there is no fear of either you or I going out of the forest in our present dresses and under the name of Armitage. No one would recognize us. You are grown tall, and so am I, and we are so tanned and sunburnt with air and exercise that we do look more like children of the forest than the sons of Colonel Beverley. Humphrey, you speak very sensibly, and I agree with you. I am not quite so fiery as the old man thinks, and if my bosom burns with indignation, at all events I have sufficient power to conceal my feelings when it is necessary. I can oppose art to art, if it becomes requisite, and which, from what you have said, I believe now is really so. One thing is certain, that while King Charles is a prisoner, as he now is, and his party dispersed or gone abroad, I can do nothing, and to make myself known would only be to injure myself and all of us. Keep quiet, therefore, I certainly shall, and also remain as I am now under a false name, but still I must and will mix up with other people, and know what is going on. I am willing to live in this forest and protect my sisters as long as it is necessary so to do, but although I will reside here, I will not be confined to the forest altogether. That's exactly what I think too, Edward, what I wish myself, but let us not be too hasty even in this. And now, I will wish you a pleasant ride, and, Edward, if you can, procure of the keepers some small shot for me. I much wish to have some. I will not forget. Goodbye, brother. Humphrey returned home to attend his farmyard, while Edward continued his journey through the forest. Some estimate of the character of the two boys may be formed from the above conversation. Edward was courageous and impetuous, hasty in his resolves, but still open to conviction. Brought up as the heir to the property, he felt, more than Humphrey could be expected to do, the mortification of being left a pauper, after such high prospects in his early days. His vindictive feelings against the opposite party were therefore more keen, and his spirit mounted more under the conviction which he harbored. His disposition was naturally warlike, and this disposition had been fostered by his father when he was a child. Still a kinder heart or a more generous lad never existed. Humphrey was of a much more subdued and philosophical temperament, not perhaps so well calculated to lead as to advise. There was great prudence in him united with courage, but his was a passive courage rather than an active one, a courage which if assailed would defend itself valiantly, but would be wary and reflective before it would attack. Humphrey had not that spirit of chivalry possessed by Edward. He was a younger son, and had to earn, in a way, his own fortune, and he felt that his inclinations were more for peace than strife. Moreover, Humphrey had talents which Edward had not, a natural talent for mechanics, and an inquisitive research into science, as far as his limited education would permit him. He was more fitted for an engineer or an agriculturist than for a soldier, although there is no doubt that he would have made a very brave soldier, if such was to have become his avocation. For kindness and generosity of nature he was equal to his brother, and this was the reason why an angry word never passed between them, for the question between them was, not which should have his way, but which should give up most to the wishes of the other. We hardly need say, that there never were two brothers who were more attached, and who so mutually respected each other. Chapter 8. Edward put the pony to a trot, and in 2 hours was on the other side of the New Forest. The directions given to him by Jacob were not forgotten, and before it was noon he found himself at the gate of the keeper's house. Dismounting, and hanging the bridle of the pony over the rail, he walked through a small garden, neatly kept, but, so early in the year, not over gay, except that the crocus and snowdrops were peeping. He rapped at the door with his knuckles, and a girl of about 14, very neatly dressed, answered the summons. "Is Oswald Partridge at home, maiden?" said Edward. "No, young man, he is not. He is in the forest." "When will he return?" "Towards the evening is his time, unless he is more than usually successful." "I have come some distance to find him," replied Edward, "and it would vex me to return without seeing him." "Has he a wife, or anyone that I could speak to?" "He has no wife, but I am willing to deliver a message. I am come about some dogs which he promised to Jacob Armitage, my relation, but the old man is too unwell, and has been for some time, to come himself for them, and he has sent me. There are dogs, young and old, large and small, in the kennels, so far do I know, and no more." "I fear then I must wait till his return," replied Edward. "I will speak to my father," replied the young girl, "if you will wait one moment." In a minute or two the girl returned, saying that her father begged that he would walk in, and he would speak with him. Edward bowed, and followed the young girl, who led the way to a room, in which was seated a man dressed after the fashion of the Roundheads of the day. His steeple-crowned hat lay on the chair, with his sword beneath it. He was sitting at a table covered with papers. "Here is the youth, father," said the girl, and having said this, she crossed the room and took a seat by the side of the fire. The man, or we should rather say gentleman, for he had the appearance of one, notwithstanding the sombre and peculiar dress he wore, continued to read a letter which he had just opened, and Edward, who feared himself the prisoner of a Roundhead when he only expected to meet a keeper, was further irritated by the neglect shown towards him by the party. Forgetting that he was, by his own assertion, not Edward Beverley, but the relative of one Jacob Armitage, he colored up with anger as he stood at the door. Fortunately, the time that it took the other party to read through the letter gave Edward also time for recollecting the disguise under which he appeared. The color subsided from his cheeks, and he remained in silence, occasionally meeting the look of the little girl, who, when their eyes met, immediately withdrew her glance. "What is your business, young man?" at last said the gentleman at the table. "I came, sir, on private business with the keeper, Oswald Partridge, to obtain 2 young hounds, which he promised to my grandfather, Jacob Armitage." "Armitage," said the other party, referring to a list on the table. "Armitage, Jacob, yes, I see he is one of the Verderers. Why has he not been here to call upon me?" "For what reason should he call upon you, sir?" replied Edward. "Simply, young man, because the New Forest is, by the Parliament, committed to my charge. Notice has been given for all those who were employed to come here, that they might be permitted to remain, or be discharged, as I may deem most advisable." "Jacob Armitage has heard nothing of this, sir," replied Edward. "He was a keeper, appointed under the king. For 2 or 3 years his allowances have never been paid, and he has lived in his own cottage, which was left to him by his father, being his own property." "And pray, may I ask, young man, do you live with Jacob Armitage?" "I have done so for more than a year." "And as your relation has received no pay and allowances, as you state, pray, by what means has he maintained himself?" "How have the other keepers maintained themselves?" replied Edward. "Do not put questions to me, sir," replied the gentleman, "but be pleased to reply to mine. What has been the means of subsistence of Jacob Armitage?" "If you think he has no means of subsistence, sir, you are mistaken," replied Edward. "We have land of our own, which we cultivate. We have our pony and our cart. We have our pigs and our cows." "And they have been sufficient?" "Had the patriarchs more?" replied Edward. "You are pithy at reply, young man, but I know something of Jacob Armitage, and we know," continued he, putting his finger close to some writing opposite the name on the list, "with whom he has associated, and with whom he has served. Now allow me to put one question. You have come, you say, for 2 young hounds. Are there services required for your pigs and cows, and to what uses are they to be put?" "We have as good a dog as there is in the forest," replied Edward, "but we wish to have others, in case we should lose him." "As good a dog as in the forest, good for what?" "For hunting." "Then you acknowledge that you do hunt?" "I acknowledge nothing for Jacob Armitage, he may answer for himself," replied Edward, "but allow me to assure you that if he has killed venison no one can blame him." "Perhaps you will explain why." "Nothing is more easy. Jacob Armitage served King Charles, who employed him as a verderer in the forest, and paid him his wages. Those who should not have done so rebelled against the king, took his authority from him, and the means of paying those he employed. They were still servants of the king, for they were not dismissed, and, having no other means of support, they considered that their good master would be but too happy that they should support themselves by killing, for their subsistence, that venison which they could no longer preserve for him without eating some themselves." "Then you admit that Jacob Armitage has killed the deer in the forest?" "I admit nothing for Jacob Armitage." "You admit that you have killed it yourself?" "I shall not answer that question, sir. In the first place, I am not here to criminate myself, and, in the next, I must know by what authority you have the right to inquire." "Young man," replied the other in a severe tone, "if you wish to know my authority, malapert as you are." At this remark Edward started, yet, recollecting himself, he compressed his lips and stood still. "This is my commission, appointing me the agent of Parliament to take charge and superintend the New Forest, with power to appoint and dismiss those whom I please. I presume you must take my word for it, as you cannot read and write." Edward stepped up to the table, and very quietly took up the paper and read it. "You have stated what is correct, sir," said he, laying it down, "and the date of it is, I perceive, on the 20th day of the last month of December. It is, therefore, but 18 days old." "And what inference would you draw from that, young man?" replied the gentleman, looking up to him with some astonishment. "Simply this, sir, that Jacob Armitage has been laid up with the rheumatism for 3 months, during which time he certainly has not killed any venison. Now, sir, until the Parliament took the forest into their hands, it undoubtedly belonged to His Majesty. If it does not now, therefore Jacob Armitage, for whatever slaughter he may have committed, is, up to the present, only answerable to his sovereign, King Charles. It is easy to perceive the scale in which you have been brought up, young man, even if there was not evidence on this paper that your forefather served under the Cavalier Colonel Beverley, and has brought you up to his way of thinking. Sir, it is a base dog that bites the hand that feeds him," replied Edward with warmth. "Jacob Armitage, and his father before him, were retainers in the family of Colonel Beverley, They were indebted to him for the situation they now hold in the forest, indebted to him for everything. They revere his name, they uphold the cause for which he fell, as I do. Young man, if you do not speak advisedly, at all events you speak gratefully. Neither have I a word of disrespect to offer to the memory of Colonel Beverley, who was a gallant man, and true to the cause which he espoused. Although it was not a holy one, but in my position, I cannot, in justice to those whom I serve, give places and emolument to those who have been, and still are, as I may judge by your expressions, adverse to the present government. Sir, replied Edward, your language with respect to Colonel Beverley has made me feel respect for you, which I confess I did not at first. What you say is very just. Not that I think you harm Jacob Armitage, as, in the first place, I know that he would not serve under you, and, in the next, that he is too old and infirm to hold the situation. Neither has he occasion for it, as his cottage and land are his own, and you cannot remove him. He has the title, I presume, replied the gentleman. He has the title given to his grandfather, long before King Charles was born, and I presume the Parliament do not intend to invalidate the acts of former kings. May I inquire what relation you are to Jacob Armitage? I believe, I have before said, his grandson. You live with him? I do. And if the old man dies, will inherit his property? Edward smiled, and looking at the young girl, said, Now, I ask you, maiden, if your father does not presume upon his office? The young girl laughed, and said, He is in authority. Not over me, certainly, and not over my grandfather, for he has dismissed him. Were you brought up at the cottage, young man? No, sir, I was brought up at Arnwood. I was a playmate of the children of Colonel Beverley. Educated with them? Yes, for, as far as my willfulness would permit, the chaplain was always ready to give me instruction. Where were you when Arnwood was burnt down? I was at the cottage at that time, replied Edward, grinding his teeth and looking wildly. Nay, nay, I can forgive any expression of feeling on your part, my young man, when that dreadful and disgraceful deed is brought to your memory. It was a stain that can never be effaced, a deed most diabolical, and what we thought would call down the vengeance of heaven. If prayers could avert, or did avert it, they were not wanting on our side. Edward remained silent. This admission on the part of the Roundhead prevented an explosion on his part. He felt that all were not so bad as he had imagined. After a long pause, he said, When I came here, sir, it was to seek Oswald Partridge, and obtain the hounds which he had promised us. But I presume that my journey is now useless. Why so? Because you have the control of the forest, and will not permit dogs for the chase to be given away to those who are not employed by the powers that now govern. You have judged correctly, in so far that my duty is to prevent it, but as the promise was made previous to the date of my commission, I presume, said he, smiling, you think I have no right to interfere, as it will be an ex post facto case, if I do. I shall not therefore interfere, only I must point out to you that the laws are still the same relative to those who take the deer in the forest by stealth. You understand me? Yes, sir, I do, and if you will not be offended, I will give you a candid reply. Speak then. I consider that the deer in this forest belong to King Charles, who is my lawful sovereign, and I own no authority but from him. I hold myself answerable to him alone for any deer I may kill, and I feel sure of his permission and full forgiveness for what I may do. That may be your opinion, my good sir, but it will not be the opinion of the ruling powers. But if caught, you will be punished, and that by me, in pursuance of the authority vested in me. Well, sir, if so, so be it. You have dismissed the Armitages on account of their upholding the king, and you cannot, therefore, be surprised that they uphold him more than ever. Nor can you be surprised if a dismissed verderer becomes a poacher. Nor can you be surprised if a poacher is caught, that he incurs the penalty, replied the Roundhead. So now there's an end of our argument. If you go into the kitchen, you will find wherewithal to refresh the outward man, and if you wish to remain till Oswald Partridge comes home, you are welcome. Edward, who felt indignant at being dismissed to the kitchen, nodded his head and smiled upon the little girl, and left the room. Well, thought he, as he went along the passage, I came here for 2 puppies, and I have found a Roundhead. I don't know how it is, but I am not so angry with him as I thought I should be. That little girl had a nice smile, she was quite handsome when she smiled. Oh, this is the kitchen, to which, thought he, the Lord of Arnwood is dismissed by a Covenanter and Roundhead, probably a tradesman or outlaw, who has served the cause. Well, be it so, as Humphrey says, I'll bide my time. But there is no one here, so I'll try if there is a stable for White Billy, who is tired, I presume, of being at the gate. Edward returned by the way he came, and went out of the front door, and through the garden to where the pony was made fast, and led him away in search of a stable. He found one behind the house, and filling the rack with hay, returned to the house, and seated himself at a porch which was at the door which led to the back premises, for the keeper's house was large and commodious. Edward was in deep thought, when he was roused by the little girl, the daughter of the newly appointed intendant of the forest, who said, I am afraid, young sir, you have had but sorry welcome in the kitchen, as there was no one to receive you. I was not aware that Fosby had gone out. If you will come with me, I may, perhaps, find you refreshment. Thanks, maiden, you are kind and considerate to an avowed poacher, replied Edward. Oh, but you will not poach, I'm sure, and if you do, I'll beg you off if I can, replied the girl, laughing. Edward followed her into the kitchen, and she soon produced a cold fowl and a venison pasty, which she placed on the table. She then went out and returned with a jug of ale. There, said she, putting it on the table, that is all that I can find. Your father's name is Heatherstone, I believe. It was so on the warrant. Yes, it is. And yours? The same as my father's, I should presume. Yes, but your baptismal name? You ask strange questions, young sir, but still I will answer you that. My baptismal name is Patience. I thank you for your condescension, replied Edward. You live here? For the present, good sir, and now I leave you. That's a nice little girl, thought Edward, although she is the daughter of a Roundhead, and she calls me sir. I cannot, therefore, look like Jacob's grandson, and must be careful. Edward then set to with a good appetite at the viands which had been placed before him, and had just finished a hearty meal when Patience Heatherstone again came in and said, Oswald Partridge is now coming home. I thank you, maiden, replied Edward. May I ask a question of you? Where is the king now? I have heard that he resides at Hurst Castle, replied the girl, but, added she in a low tone, all attempts to see him would be useless, and only hurt him and those who made the attempt. Having said this, she left the room. Chapter 9. Edward, having finished his meal, and had a good pull at the jug of ale, which was a liquor he had not tasted for a long while, rose from the table and went out of the back door and found there Oswald Partridge. He accosted him, stating the reason for his coming over to him. "I did not know that Jacob had a grandson. Indeed, I never knew that he had a son." "Have you been living with him long?" "More than a year," replied Edward. "Before that I was in the household at Arnwood." "Then you are of the king's side, I presume," replied Oswald. "To death," replied Edward, "when the time comes." "And I am also, that you may suppose, for never would I give a hound to anyone that was not. But we had better go to the kennels. Dogs may hear, but they can't repeat." "I little thought to have met anyone but you here when I came," said Edward, "and I will now tell you all that passed between me and the new intendant." Edward then related the conversation. "You have been bold," said Oswald, "but perhaps it is all the better. I am to retain my situation, and so are 2 others, but there are many new hands coming in as rangers. I know nothing of them but that they are little fitted for their places, and rail against the king all day long, which I suppose is their chief merit in the eyes of those who appoint them. However, one thing is certain, that if those fellows cannot stalk a deer themselves, they will do all they can to prevent others, so you must be on the alert, for the punishment is severe." "I fear them not. The only difficulty is, that we shall not be able to find a sale for the venison now," replied Edward. "Oh, never fear that. I will give you the names of those who will take all your venison off your hands without any risk on your part, except in the killing of it. They will meet you in the park, lay down ready money, and take it away. I don't know, but I have an idea that this new intendant, or what you may call him, is not so severe as he pretends to be. Indeed, his permitting you to say what he did, and his own words relative to the colonel, convince me that I am right in the opinion that I formed." "Do you know who he is?" "Not much about him, but he is a great friend of General Cromwell's, and they say has done good service to the parliamentary cause, but we shall meet again, for the forest is free, at all events. If you come here," continued Oswald, "do not carry your gun, and see that you are not watched home. There are the dogs for your grandfather. Why, how old must you be, for Jacob is not more than 60, or thereabout?" "I am 15 past, nevertheless." "I should have put you down for 18 or 19 at least." "You are well grown indeed for that age." "Well, nothing like a forest life to turn a boy into a man." "Can you stalk a deer?" "I seldom go out without bringing one down." "Indeed." "That Jacob is a master of his craft is certain." "But you are young to have learnt it so soon." "Can you tell the slot of a brocket from a stag?" "Yes, and the slot of a brocket from a doe." "Better still." "We must go out together, and besides, I must know where the old man's cottage is, for I do not exactly, in the first place, because I may want to come to you, and in the next, that I may put others on a false scent. Do you know the clump of large oaks, which they call the Clump Royal?" "Yes, I do." "Will you meet me there the day after tomorrow, at early dawn?" "If I live and do well." "That's enough. Take the dogs and the leashes, and go away now." "Many thanks, but I must not leave the pony, he is in the stable." The keeper nodded adieu to Edward, and left him to go to the stable for the pony. Edward saddled White Billy, and rode away across the forest with the dogs trotting at the pony's heels. Edward had much to reflect upon as he rode back to the cottage. He felt that his position was one of more difficulty than before. That old Jacob Armitage would not last much longer, he was convinced. Even now the poor old man was shrunk away to a skeleton with pain and disease. That the livelihood to be procured from the forest would be attended with peril, now that order had been restored and the forest was no longer neglected, was certain, and he rejoiced that Humphrey had, by his assiduity and intelligence, made the farm so profitable as it promised to be. Indeed, he felt that, if necessary, they could live upon the proceeds of the farm, and not run the risk of imprisonment by stalking the deer. But he had told the intendant that he considered the game as the king's property, and he was resolved that he would at all events run the risk, although he would no longer permit Humphrey so to do. If anything happens to me, thought Edward, Humphrey will still be at the cottage to take care of my sisters, and if I am obliged to fly the country, it will suit well my feelings, as I can then offer my services to those who still support the king. With these thoughts, and many others, he amused himself until, late in the evening, he arrived at the cottage. He found all in bed except Humphrey, who had waited for him, and to whom he narrated all that had passed. Humphrey said little in reply. He wished to think it over before he gave any opinion. He told Edward that Jacob had been very ill the whole of the day, and had requested Alice to read the Bible to him during the evening. The next morning Edward went to Jacob, who for the last 10 days had altogether kept his bed, and gave him the detail of what had happened at the keeper's lodge. "You have been more bold than prudent, Edward," replied Jacob, "but I could not expect you to have spoken otherwise. You are too proud and too manly to tell a lie, and I am glad that it is so. As for your upholding the king, although he is now a prisoner in their hands, they cannot blame you or punish you for that, as long as you have not weapons in your hands, but now that they have taken the forest under their jurisdiction, you must be careful, for they are the ruling powers at present, and must be obeyed, or the forfeit must be paid. Still, I do not ask you to promise me this or that. I only point out to you that your sisters will suffer by any imprudence on your part, and for their sakes be careful. I say this, Edward, because I feel that my days are numbered, and that in a short time I shall be called away. You will then have all the load on your shoulders which has been latterly on mine. I have no fear for the result, if you are prudent. These few months past, during which I have only been a burden to you, have proved that you and Humphrey can find a living here for yourselves and your sisters, and it is fortunate, now that the forest laws are about to be put in force, that you have made the farm so profitable. If I might advise, let your hunting in the forest be confined to the wild cattle. They are not game, and the forest laws do not extend to them, and the meat is as valuable as venison, that is to say, it does not sell so dear, but there is more of it. But stick to the farm as much as you can, for you see, Edward, you do not look like a low-born forester, nor ought you to do so, and the more quiet you keep, the better. As for Oswald Partridge, you may trust him. I know him well, and he will prove your friend for my sake, as soon as he hears that I am dead. Leave me now, I will talk to you again in the evening. Send Alice to me, my dear boy." Edward was much distressed to perceive the change which had taken place in old Jacob. He was evidently much worse, but Edward had no idea how much worse he was. Edward assisted Humphrey in the farm, and in the evening again went to Jacob, and then told him of the arrangement he had made to meet Oswald Partridge on the following morning. "Go, my boy," said Jacob, "be as intimate with him as you can, and make a friend of him. Nay, if it should be necessary, you may tell him who you are. I did think of telling him myself, as it might be important to you one day as evidence. I think you had better bring him here tomorrow night, Edward. Tell him I am dying, and wish to speak to him before I go. Alice will read the Bible to me now, and I will talk with you another time." Early the next morning Edward set off to the appointed rendezvous with Oswald Partridge. The Clump Royal, as it was called, from the peculiar size and beauty of the oaks, was about 7 miles from the cottage, and at the hour and time indicated Edward, with his gun in his hand, and Smoker lying beside him, was leaning against one of those monarchs of the forest. He did not wait long. Oswald Partridge, similarly provided, made his appearance, and Edward advanced to meet him. "Welcome, Oswald," said Edward. "And welcome to you also, my lion lad," replied Oswald. "I have been hard questioned about you since we parted, first, by the Roundhead Heatherstone, who plied me in all manner of ways to find out whether you are what you assert, the grandson of Jacob, or some other person. I really believe that he fancies you are the Duke of York, but he could not get any more from me than what I knew. I told him that your grandfather's cottage was his own property, and a grant to his forefathers, that you were brought up at Arnwood, and had joined your grandfather after the death of the colonel, and the murderous burning of the house and all within it by his party. But the pretty little daughter was more curious still. She cross-questioned me in every way when her father was not present, and at last begged me as a favor to tell you not to take the deer, as her father was very strict in his duty, and, if caught, you would be imprisoned. Many thanks to her for her caution, but I hope to take one today. Nevertheless, replied Edward, a hart royal is not meat for Roundheads, although the king's servants may feast on them. That's truly said. Well, now I must see your woodcraft. You shall be the leader of the chase. Think you we can harbor a stag about here? Yes, in this month, no doubt. Let us walk on, said Edward. The wind is fresh from the eastern quarter. We will face it, if you please, or rather, keep it blowing on our right cheek for the present. 'Tis well, replied Oswald, and they walked for about half an hour. This is the slot of a doe, said Edward, in a low voice, pointing to the marks. Yonder thicket is a likely harbor for the stag. They proceeded, and Edward pointed out to Oswald the slot of the stag into the thicket. They then walked round, and found no marks of the animal having left his lair. He is here, whispered Edward, and Oswald made a sign for Edward to enter the thicket, while he walked to the other side. Edward entered the thicket cautiously. In the center he perceived, through the trees, a small cleared spot, covered with high fern, and felt certain that the stag was lying there. He forced his way on his knees till he had a better view of the place, and then cocked his gun. The noise induced the stag to move his antlers, and discover his lair. Edward could just perceive the eye of the animal through the heath. He waited till the beast settled again, took steady aim, and fired. At the report of the gun another stag sprung up and burst away. Oswald fired and wounded it, but the animal made off, followed by the dogs. Edward, who hardly knew whether he had missed or not, but felt almost certain that he had not, hastened out of the thicket to join in the chase, and, as he passed through the fern patch, perceived that his quarry lay dead. He then followed the chase, and, being very fleet of foot, soon came up with Oswald, and passed him without speaking. The stag made for a swampy ground, and finally took to the water beyond it, and stood at bay. Edward then waited for Oswald, who came up with him. "He has soiled," said Edward, "and now you may go in and kill him." Oswald, eager in the chase, hastened up to where the dogs and stag were in the water, and put a bullet through the animal's head. Edward went to him, assisted him to drag the stag out of the water, and then Oswald cut its throat, and proceeded to perform the usual offices. "How did you happen to miss him?" said Oswald, "for these are my shots." "Because I never fired at him," said Edward. "My quarry lies dead in the fern, and a fine fellow he is." "This is a warrantable stag," said Oswald. "Yes, but mine is a hart royal, as you will see when we go back." As soon as Oswald had done his work, he hung the quarters of the animal on an oak tree, and went back with Edward. "Where did you hit him, Edward?" said Oswald, as they walked along. "I could only see his eye through the fern, and I must have hit him thereabouts." On their arrival at the spot, Oswald found that Edward had put the ball right into the eye of the stag. "Well," said he, "you made me suppose that you knew something of our craft, but I did not believe that you were so apt as you thought yourself to be. I now confess that you are a master, as far as I can see, in all branches of the craft. This is, indeed, a hart royal. 25 antlers, as I live. Come, out with your knife, and let us finish, for if we are to go to the cottage we have no time to lose. It will be dark in half an hour." They hung all the quarters of the stag as before, and then set off for Jacob's cottage, Edward proposing that Oswald should take the cart and pony to carry the meat home the next morning, and that he would accompany him to bring it back. "That will do capitally," said Oswald, "and here we are, if I recollect right, and I hope there is something to eat." "No fear of that, Alice will be prepared for us," replied Edward. Their dinner was ready for them, and Oswald praised the cooking. He was much surprised to find that Jacob had 4 grandchildren. After dinner he went into Jacob's room, and remained with him more than an hour. During this conference Jacob confided to Oswald that the 4 children were the sons and daughters of Colonel Beverley, supposed to have been burnt in the firing of Arnwood. Oswald came out, much surprised as well as pleased with the information, and with the confidence reposed in him. He saluted Edward and Humphrey respectfully, and said, "I was not aware with whom I was in company, sir, as you may well imagine, but the knowledge of it has made my heart glad." "Nay, Oswald," replied Edward, "remember that I am still Edward Armitage, and that we are the grandchildren of old Jacob." "Certainly, sir, I will, for your own sake, not forget that such is to be supposed to be the case. I assure you I think it very fortunate that Jacob has confided the secret to me, as it may be in my power to be useful. I little thought that I should ever have had my dinner cooked by a daughter of Colonel Beverley." They then entered into a long conversation, during which Oswald expressed his opinion that the old man was sinking fast, and would not last more than 3 or 4 days. Oswald had a bed made up for him on the floor of the room where Edward and Humphrey slept, and the next morning they set off, at an early hour, with the pony and cart, loaded it with the venison, and took it across the forest to the keeper's lodge. It was so late when they arrived that Edward consented to pass the night there, and return home on the following morning. Oswald went into the sitting room to speak with the intendant of the forest, leaving Edward in the kitchen with Phoebe, the maidservant. He told the intendant that he had brought home some fine venison, and wished his orders about it. He also stated that he had been assisted by Edward Armitage, who had brought the venison home for him in his cart, and who was now in the kitchen, as he would be obliged to pass the night there, and, on being questioned, he was lavish in his praises of Edward's skill and knowledge of woodcraft, which he declared to be superior to his own. It proves that the young man has had much practice, at all events, reft Mr. Heatherstone, smiling. He has been living at the king's expense, but he must not follow it up at the cost of the Parliament. It would be well to take this young man as a ranger if we could, for although he is opposed to us, yet, if he once took our service, he would be faithful, I am sure. You can propose it to him, Oswald. The haunches of that hart royal must be sent up to General Cromwell tomorrow. The remainder we will give directions for as soon as I have made up my mind how to dispose of it. Oswald left the room, and came back to Edward. General Cromwell is to have the haunches of your stag, said he to Edward, smiling, and the intendant proposes that you should take service as one of the rangers. I thank you, replied Edward, but I've no fancy to find venison for General Cromwell and his Roundheads, and so you may tell the intendant, with many thanks for his goodwill towards me, nevertheless. I thought as much, but the man meant kindly, that I really think. Now, Phoebe, what can you give us to eat, for we are hungry? You shall be served directly, replied Phoebe. I have some steaks on the fire. And you must find a bed for my young friend here. I have none in the house, but there is plenty of good straw over the stables. That will do, replied Edward, I'm not particular. I suppose not. Why should you be? Replied Phoebe, who was rather old and rather cross. If you mount the ladder that you will see against the wall, you will find a good bed when you are at the top of it. Oswald was about to remonstrate, but Edward held up his finger, and no more was said. As soon as they had finished their supper, Phoebe proposed that they should go to bed. It was late, and she would sit up no longer. Edward rose and went out, followed by Oswald, who had given up the keeper's house to the intendant and his daughter, and slept in the cottage of one of the rangers, about a quarter of a mile off. After some conversation they shook hands and parted, as Edward intended returning very early the next morning, being anxious about old Jacob. Edward went up the ladder into the loft. There was no door to shut out the wind, which blew piercingly cold, and after a time he found himself so chilled that he could not sleep. He rose to see if he could not find some protection from the wind by getting more into a corner, for although Fosby had told him that there was plenty of straw, it proved that there was very little indeed in the loft, barely enough to lie down upon. Edward, after a time, descended the ladder to walk in the yard, that by exercise he might recover the use of his limbs. At last, turning to and fro, he cast his eyes up to the window of the bedroom above the kitchen, where he perceived a light was still burning. He thought it was Phoebe, the maid, going to bed, and with no very gracious feelings towards her for having deprived him of his own night's rest, he was wishing that she might have the toothache or something else to keep her awake, when suddenly through the white window curtain he perceived a broad light in the room. It increased every moment, and he saw the figure of a female rush past it, and attempt to open the window. The drawing of the curtains showed him that the room was on fire. A moment's thought, and he ran for the ladder by which he had ascended to the loft, and placed it against the window. The flames were less bright, and he could not see the female who had been at the window when he went for the ladder. He ascended quickly, and burst open the casement, The smoke poured out in such volumes that it nearly suffocated him, but he went in, and as soon as he was inside, he stumbled against the body of the person who had attempted to open the window, but who had fallen down senseless. As he raised the body, the fire, which had been smothered from want of air when all the windows and doors were closed, now burst out, and he was scorched before he could get on the ladder again, with the body in his arms, but he succeeded in getting it down safe. Perceiving that the clothes were on fire, he held them till they were extinguished, and then, for the first time, discovered that he had brought down the daughter of the intendant of the forest. There was no time to be lost, so Edward carried her into the stable and left her there, still insensible, upon the straw, in a spare stall, while he hastened to alarm the house. The watering butt for the horses was outside the stable. Edward caught up the pail, filled it, and hastening up the ladder, threw it into the room, and then descended for more. By this time Edward's continual calls of fire had aroused the people of the house, and also of the cottages adjacent. Mr. Heatherstone came out half-dressed, and with horror on his countenance. Fosby followed screaming, and the other people now hastened from the cottages. "Save her! My daughter is in the room," exclaimed Mr. Heatherstone. "Oh, save her, or let me do so," cried the poor man in agony, but the fire burst out of the window in such force that any attempt would have been in vain. "Oswald," cried Edward to him, "let the people pass the water up to me as fast as possible. They can do no good looking on." Oswald set the men to the work, and Edward was now supplied with water so fast that the fire began to diminish. The window was now approachable, and a few more buckets enabled him to put 1 foot into the room, and then every moment the flames and smoke decreased. Meanwhile it would be impossible to describe the agony of the intendant, who would have rushed up the ladder into the flames had he not been held by some of the men. "My daughter! My child! Burnt to death!" exclaimed he, clasping his hands. At that moment a voice in the crowd called out, "There were 4 burnt at Arnwood." "God of heaven!" exclaimed Mr. Heatherstone, falling down into a swoon, in which state he was carried to a neighboring cottage. Meanwhile the supply of water enabled Edward to put out the fire altogether. The furniture of the room was burnt, but the fire had extended no farther, and when Edward was satisfied that there was no more danger, he descended the ladder, and left it to others to see that all was safe. He then called Oswald to him, and desired that he would accompany him to the stable. "Oh, sir," replied Oswald, "this is dreadful. And such a sweet young lady too." "She is safe and well," replied Edward. "I think so, at least. I brought her down the ladder and put her in the stable before I attempted to put out the fire. See, there she is. She has not recovered yet from her swoon. Bring some water. She breathes. Thank God. There, that will do, Oswald, she is recovering. Now let us cover her up in your cloak, and carry her to your cottage. We will recover her there." Oswald folded up the still unconscious girl in his cloak, and carried her away in his arms, followed by Edward. As soon as they arrived at the cottage, the inmates of which were all busy at the keeper's lodge, they put her on a bed, and very soon restored her to consciousness. "Where is my father?" cried Patience, as soon as she was sufficiently recovered. "He is safe and well, miss," replied Oswald. "Is the house burnt down? No. The fire is all out again." "Who saved me?" Tell me. Young Armitage, miss. Who is he? Oh, I recollect now, but I must go to my father. Where is he? In the other cottage, miss. Patience attempted to stand, but found that she was too much exhausted, and she fell back again on the bed. I can't stand, said she. Bring my father to me. I will, miss, replied Oswald. Will you stay here, Edward? Yes, replied Edward. He went out of the cottage door, and remained there while Oswald went to Mr. Heatherstone. Oswald found him sensible, but in deep distress, as may be imagined. The fire is all out, sir, said Oswald. I care not for that. My poor, poor child. Your child is safe, sir, replied Oswald. Safe, did you say? Cried Mr. Heatherstone, starting up. Safe, where? In my cottage. She has sent me for you. Mr. Heatherstone rushed out, passed by Edward, who was standing at the door of the other cottage, and was in his daughter's arms. Oswald came out to Edward, who then detailed to him the way in which he had saved the girl. Had it not been for the ill nature of that girl Phoebe, in sending me to sleep where there was no straw, they would all have been burnt, observed Edward. She gave you an opportunity of rewarding good for evil, observed Oswald. Yes, but I am burnt very much in my arm, said Edward. Have you anything that will be good for it? Yes, I think I have. Wait a moment. Oswald went into the cottage and returned with some salve, with which he dressed Edward's arm, which proved to be very severely burnt. How grateful the intendant ought to be, and will be, I have no doubt, observed Oswald. And for that very reason I shall saddle my pony and ride home as fast as I can, and, do you hear, Oswald, do not show him where I live. I hardly know how I can refuse him, if he requires it. But you must not. He will be offering me a situation in the forest, by way of showing his gratitude, and I will accept of none. I have no objection to save his daughter, as I would save the daughter of my worst enemy, or my worst enemy himself, from such a dreadful death, but I do not want their thanks or offers of service. I will accept nothing from a Roundhead, and as for the venison in the forest, it belongs to the king, and I shall help myself whenever I think proper. Goodbye, Oswald. You will call and see us when you have time? I will be with you before the week is out, depend upon it, replied Oswald. Edward then asked Oswald to saddle his pony for him, as his arm prevented him from doing it himself, and as soon as it was done he rode away for the cottage. Edward rode fast, for he was anxious to get home and ascertain the state of poor old Jacob, and, moreover, his burnt arm was very painful. He was met by Humphrey about a mile from the cottage, who told him that he did not think that the old man could last many hours, and that he was very anxious to see him. As the pony was quite tired with the fast pace that Edward had ridden, Edward pulled up to a walk, and as they went along acquainted Humphrey with what had passed. Is your arm very painful? Yes, it is indeed, replied Edward, but it can't be helped. No, of course not, but it may be made more easy. I know what will do it some good, for I recollect when Benjamin burnt his hand at Arnwood, what they applied to it, and it gave him great relief. Yes, very likely, but I am not aware that we have any drugs or medicine in the cottage. But here we are. Will you take Billy to the stable, while I go on to old Jacob? Thank God that you are come, Edward, said the old forester, for I was anxious to see you before I die, and something tells me that I have but a short time to remain here." "Why should you say so? Do you feel very ill, Dot?" "No, not ill, but I feel that I am sinking fast." "Recollect that I am an old man, Edward." "Not so very old, Jacob. Oswald said that you were not more than 60 years old." "Oswald knows nothing about it." "I am past 76, Edward, and you know, Edward, the Bible says that the days of men are 60 years and 10, so that I am beyond the mark. And now, Edward, I have but few words to say. Be careful, if not for your own sake, at least for your little sister's. You are young, but you are strong and powerful above your years, and can better protect them than I could. I see darker days yet coming, but it is His will, and who shall doubt that that is right? I pray you not to make your birth and lineage known as yet. It can do no good, and it may do harm, and if you can be persuaded to live in the cottage, and to live on the farm, which will now support you all, it will be better. Do not get into trouble about the venison, which they now claim as their own. You will find some money in the bag in my chest, sufficient to buy all you want for a long while, but take care of it, for there is no saying but you may require it. And now, Edward, call your brother and sisters to me, that I may bid them farewell. I am, as we all are, sinful, but I trust in the mercy of God through Jesus Christ. Edward, I have done my duty towards you, as well as I have been able, but promise me one thing, that you will read the Bible and prayers every morning and evening, as I have always done, after I am gone. Promise me that, Edward. I promise you that it shall be done, Jacob, replied Edward, and I will not forget your other advice. God bless you, Edward. Now call the children. Edward summoned his sisters and Humphrey. Humphrey, my good boy, said Jacob, recollect that in the midst of life we are in death, and that there is no security for young or old. You or your brother may be cut off in your youth, one may be taken, and the other left. Recollect, your sisters depend upon you, and do not therefore be rash. I fear that you will run too much risk after the wild cattle, for you are always scheming after taking them. Be careful, Humphrey, for you can ill be spared. Hold to the farm as it now is, it will support you all. My dear Alice and Edith, I am dying. Very soon I shall be laid by your brothers in my grave. Be good children, and look up to your brothers for everything. And now, kiss me, Alice, you have been a great comfort to me, for you have read the Bible to me when I could no longer read myself. May your deathbed be as well attended as mine has been, and may you live happily, and die the death of a Christian. Goodbye, and may God bless you. Bless you, Edith. May you grow up as good and as innocent as you are now. Farewell, Humphrey, farewell, Edward. My eyes are dim, pray for me, children. O God of mercy, pardon my many sins, and receive my soul, through Jesus Christ. Amen, amen. These were the last words spoken by the old forester. The children, who were kneeling by the side of the bed, praying as he had requested, when they rose up, found that he was dead. They all wept bitterly, for they dearly loved the good old man. Alice remained sobbing in Edward's arms, and Edith in Humphrey's, and it was long before the brothers could console them. Humphrey at last said to Alice, "You hurt poor Edward's arm. You don't know how painful it is. Come, dears, let us go into the other room, and get something to take the pain away." These requests diverted the attention at the same time that it roused fresh sympathy in the little girls. They all went into the sitting room. Humphrey gave his sisters some potatoes to scrape upon a piece of linen, while he took off Edward's coat and turned up his shirt sleeves. The scraped potatoes were then laid on the burn, and Edward said they gave him great relief. Some more were then scraped by the little girls, who could not, however, repress their occasional sobs. Humphrey then told them that Edward had had nothing to eat, and that they must get him some supper. This again occupied them for some time, and when the supper was ready, they all sat down to it. They went to bed early, but not before Edward had read a chapter out of the Bible and the prayers, as old Jacob had always done, and this again caused their tears to flow afresh. "Come, Alice dear, you and Edith must go to bed," said Humphrey. The little girls threw themselves into their brother's arms, and having wept for some time, Alice raised herself, and taking Edith by the hand, led her away to the bedroom. Chapter 10. "Humphrey," said Edward, "the sooner all this is over the better. As long as poor Jacob's body remains in the cottage there will be nothing but distress with the poor girls." "I agree with you," replied Humphrey. "Where shall we bury him?" "Under the great oak tree, at the back of the cottage," replied Edward. "One day the old man said to me that he should like to be buried under one of the oaks of the forest." "Well then, I will go and dig his grave tonight," replied Humphrey. "The moon is bright, and I shall have it finished before morning." "I am sorry that I cannot help you, Humphrey." "I am sorry that you are hurt, but I want no help, Edward. If you will lie down a little, perhaps you will be able to sleep. Let us change the potato poultice before you go on." Humphrey put the fresh dressing on Edward's arm, and Edward, who was very much exhausted, lay down in his clothes on the bed. Humphrey went out, and having found his tools, set to his task. He worked hard, and before morning had finished. He then went in, and took his place on the bed by the side of Edward, who was in a sound sleep. At daylight Humphrey rose, and waked Edward. "All is ready, Edward, but I fear you must help me to put poor Jacob in the cart. Do you think you can?" "Oh yes, my arm is much easier, and I feel very different from what I did last night. If you will go and get the cart I will see what I can do in the meantime." When Humphrey returned he found Edward had selected a sheet to wind the body in, but could not do more till Humphrey came to help him. They then wrapped it round the body, and carried it out of the cottage, and put it into the cart. "Now, Edward, shall we call our sisters?" "No, not yet. Let us have the body laid in the grave first, and then we will call them." They dragged the body on the cart to the grave, and laid it in it, and then returned back and put the pony in the stable again. "Are there not prayers proper for reading over the dead?" said Humphrey. "I believe that there are, but they are not in the Bible, so we must read some portion of the Bible," said Edward. "Yes, I think there is one of the Psalms which it would be right to read, Edward," said Humphrey, turning over the leaves. "Here it is, the 90th, in which you recollect it says that the days of man are 60 years and 10. "Yes," replied Edward, "and we will read this one also, the 146th. "Are our sisters risen, do you think?" "I am sure that they are," replied Humphrey, "and I will go to them." Humphrey went to the door, and said, "Alice, Alice and Edith, come out immediately." They were both ready dressed. Edward took the Bible under his arm, and Alice by the hand. Humphrey led Edith until they arrived at the grave, when the two little girls saw the covered body of Jacob lying in it. "Kneel down," said Edward, opening the Bible. And they all knelt down by the grave. Edward read the 2 Psalms, and then closed the book. The little girls took one last look at the body, and then turned away weeping to the cottage. Edward and Humphrey filled up the grave, and then followed their sisters home. "I'm glad it's over," said Humphrey, wiping his eyes. "Poor old Jacob. I'll put a paling round his grave." "Come in, Humphrey," said Edward. Edward sat down upon old Jacob's chair, and took Alice and Edith to him. Putting his arm round each, he said, "Alice and Edith, my dear little sisters, we have lost a good friend, and one to whose memory we cannot be too grateful. He saved us from perishing in the flames which burnt down our father's house, and has protected us here ever since. He is gone, for it has pleased God to summon him to him, and we must bow to the will of heaven, and here we are, brothers and sisters, orphans, and with no one to look to for protection but heaven. Here we are, away from the rest of the world, living for one another. What then must we do? We must love one another dearly, and help one another. I will do my part, if my life is spared, and so will Humphrey, and so will you, my dear sisters. I can answer for all. Now it is no use to lament, we must all work, and work cheerfully, and we will pray every morning and every night that God will bless our endeavors, and enable us to provide for ourselves, and live here in peace and safety. Kiss me, dear Alice and Edith, and kiss Humphrey, and kiss one another. Let these kisses be the seals to our bond, and let us put our trust in him who only is a father to the widow and the orphan. And now let us pray." Edward and the children repeated the Lord's Prayer, and then rose up. They went to their respective employments, and the labor of the day soon made them composed, although then, for many days afterwards, it was but occasionally that a smile was seen upon their lips. Thus passed a week, by which time Edward's arm was so far well that it gave him no pain, and he was able to assist Humphrey in the work on the farm. The snow had disappeared, and the spring, although it had been checked for a time, now made rapid advances. Constant occupation and the return of fine weather both had the effect of restoring the serenity of their minds, and while Humphrey was preparing the paling to fix round the grave of old Jacob, Alice and Edith collected the wild violets which now peeped forth on sheltered spots, and planted the roots over the grave. Edward also procured all the early flowers he could collect, and assisted his sisters in their task, and thus, in planting it, and putting up the paling, the grave of the old man became their constant work ground, and when their labor was done, they would still remain there and talk over his worth. The Sunday following the burial, the weather being fine and warm, Edward proposed that they should read the usual service, which had been selected by old Jacob, at the grave, and not in the cottage, as formerly, and this they continued afterwards to do, whenever the weather would permit. Thus did old Jacob's resting place become their church, and overpower them with those feelings of love and devotion which give efficacy to prayer. As soon as the paling was finished, Humphrey put up a board against the oak tree, with the simple words carved on it, Jacob Armitage. Edward had every day expected that Oswald Partridge would have called upon him, as he had promised to do before the week was out, but Oswald had not made his appearance, much to Edward's surprise. A month passed away, Edward's arm was now quite well, and still Oswald came not. One morning Humphrey and Edward were conversing upon many points, the principal of which was upon Edward going to Lymington, for they were now in want of flour and meal. When Edward thought of what old Jacob had told him relative to the money that he would find in his chest, he went into Jacob's room and opened the chest, at the bottom of which, under the clothes, he found a leather bag, which he brought out to Humphrey. On opening it, they were much surprised to find in it more than 60 gold pieces, besides a great deal of silver coin. "Surely this is a great sum of money," observed Humphrey. "I don't know what is the price of things, but it appears to me that it ought to last us a long while." "I think so too," replied Edward. "I wish Oswald Partridge would come, for I want to ask him many questions. I don't know the price of flour or anything else we have to purchase, nor do I know what I ought to be paid for vention. I don't like to go to Lymington till I see him, for that reason. If he does not come soon, I shall ride over and see what is the matter." Edward then replaced the money in the chest, and he and Humphrey then went out to the farmyard to go on with their work. It was not until 6 weeks after the death of old Jacob that Oswald Partridge made his appearance. "How is the old man, sir?" was his first question. "He was buried a few days after you left," replied Edward. "I expected as much," said the forester. "Peace be with him, he was a good man. And how is your arm?" "Nearly well," replied Edward. "Now, sit down, Oswald, for I have a great deal to say to you. And first let me ask you what has detained you from coming here according to your promise." "Simply, and in few words, murder." "Murder!" exclaimed Edward. "Yes, deliberate murder, sir. In short, they have beheaded the king, beheaded King Charles, our sovereign." "Have they dared to do it?" "They have," reft Oswald. "We know little that is going on in the forest, but when I saw you last I heard that he was then in London, and was to be tried." "Tried!" exclaimed Edward. "How could they try a king?" "By the laws of our country a man must be tried by his equals, and where were his equals?" "Majesty becomes not, I suppose," replied Oswald, "but still it is as I say. 2 days after you left the intendant hastened up to London, and from what I have understood, he was strongly opposed to the deed, and did all he could to prevent it, but it was of no use. When he left he gave me strict injunctions not to go away from the cottage for an hour, as his daughter was left alone, and as I promised, I could not come to you, but, nevertheless, Patience received letters from him, and told me what I tell you." "You have not dined, Oswald," said Edward. "No, that I have not." "Alice, dear, get some dinner, will you? And Oswald, while you dine, excuse me if I leave you for a while. Your intelligence has so astounded me that I can listen to nothing else till I have had a little while to commune with myself and subdue my feelings." Edward was indeed in a state of mind which required calming down. He quitted the cottage and walked out for some distance into the forest in deep thought. "Murdered at last," exclaimed he. "Yes, well may it be called murder, and no one to save him, not a blow struck in his defense, not an arm raised. How much gallant blood has been shed in vain! Spirit of my fathers, didst thou leave none of thy mettle and thy honor behind thee, or has all England become craven? Well, the time will come, and if I can no longer hope to fight for my king, at all events I can fight against those who have murdered him." Such were Edward's thoughts as he wandered through the forest, and more than an hour elapsed before his impetuous blood could return to its usual flow. At last, more calm, he returned to the cottage, and listened to the details which Oswald now gave to him of what he had heard. When Oswald had finished, Edward asked him whether the intendant had returned. "Yes, or I should not have been here," replied Oswald. "He came back yesterday, looking most disconsolate and grave, and I hear that he returns to London in a few days. Indeed, he told me so himself, for I requested permission to come over to see your grandfather. He said that I might go, but must return soon, as he must go back to London. I believe, from what Miss Patience told me, and what I have seen myself, that he is sincerely amazed and vexed at what has taken place, and so indeed are many more, who, although opposed to the King's method of government, never had an idea that things should have turned out as they have done. I have a message from him to you, which is, that he begs you will come to see him, that he may thank you for the preservation of his child. I will take his thanks from you, Oswald. That will do as well as if he gave them me in person." "Yes, perhaps so, but I have another message from another party, which is, the young lady herself. She desires me to tell you that she will never be happy till she has seen you, and thanked you for your courage and kindness, and that you have no right to put her under such an obligation, and not give her an opportunity of expressing what she feels. Now, Mr. Edward, I am certain that she is earnest in what she says, and she made me promise that I would persuade you to come. I could not refuse her, for she is a dear little creature. As her father will go to London in a few days, you may ride over and see her without any fear of being affronted by any offers which he may make to you." "Well," replied Edward, "I have no great objection to see her again, for she was very kind to me, and as you say that the intendant will not be there, I perhaps may come. But now I must talk to you about other matters." Edward then put many questions to Oswald relative to the value of various articles, and to the best method of disposing of his venison. Oswald answered all his questions, and Edward took down notes and directions on paper. Oswald remained with them for 2 days, and then bade them farewell, exacting a promise from Edward that he would come to the ranger's cottage as soon as he could. "Should the intendant come back before he is expected, I will come over and let you know, but I think, from what I heard him say, he expected to be at least a month in London." Edward promised that Oswald should see him in less than 10 days, and Oswald set out on his journey. "Humphrey," said Edward, as soon as Oswald was gone, "I have made up my mind to go to Lymington tomorrow. We must have some flour, and many other articles, which Alice says she can no longer do without." "Why should we not both go, Edward?" replied Humphrey. "No, not this time," replied Edward. "I have to find out many things and many people, and I had rather go by myself. Besides, I cannot allow my sisters to be left alone. I do not consider there is any danger, I admit, but something might happen to them. I should never forgive myself. Still, it is necessary that you should go to Lymington with me some time or another, that you may know where to purchase and sell, if required. What I propose is, that I will ask Oswald to come and stay here a couple of days. We will then leave him in charge of our sisters, and go to Lymington together." "You are right, Edward, that will be the best plan." As Humphrey made this remark, Oswald re-entered the cottage. "I will tell you why I have returned, Mr. Edward," said Oswald. "It is of no consequence whether I return now or tomorrow. It is now early, and as you intend going to Lymington, it occurred to me that I had better go with you. I can then show you all you want, which will be much better than going by yourself." "Thank you, Oswald, I am much obliged to you," said Edward. "Humphrey, we will get the cart out immediately, or we shall be late." "Will you get it, Humphrey? For I must go for some money, and speak to Alice." Humphrey went immediately to put the pony in the cart, when Edward said, "Oswald, you must not call me Mr. Edward, even when we are alone. If you do, you will be calling me so before other people, and, therefore, recollect in future, it must be plain Edward." "Since you wish it, certainly," replied Oswald. "Indeed it would be better, for a slip of the tongue before other people might create suspicion." The pony and cart were soon at the door, and Edward, having received further instructions from Alice, set off for Lymington, accompanied by Oswald. Chapter 12. A narrow escape. "Humphrey," said Edward, as he held his brother's hand. "Yes, indeed, we may thank heaven for our preservation," reft Humphrey, "and poor Smoker. Let us see if he is much hurt." "I trust not," said Edward, going up to the dog, who remained quite still on the ground, with his tongue out, and panting violently. They examined poor Smoker all over very carefully, and found that there was no external wound, but on Edward pressing his side the animal gave a low howl. "It is there where the horn of the bull took him," observed Humphrey. "Yes," said Edward, pressing and feeling softly, "and he has 2 of his ribs broken. Humphrey, see if you can get him a little water, that will recover him more than anything else. The bull has knocked the breath out of his body. I think he will soon be well again, poor fellow." Humphrey soon returned with some water from a neighboring pool. He brought it in his hat and gave it to the dog, who lapped it slowly at first, but afterwards much faster, and wagging his tail. "He will do now," said Edward. "We must give him time to recover himself. Now then, let us examine our quarry. Why, Humphrey, what a quantity of meat we have here! It will take 3 journeys to Lymington at least." "Yes, and no time to lose, for the weather is getting warm already, Edward. Now what to do? Will you remain, while I go home for the cart?" "Yes, it's no use both going. I will stay here and watch poor Smoker, and take off the skins ready by the time you are back again. Leave me your knife as well as my own, for one will soon be blunt." Humphrey gave his knife to Edward, and taking up his gun, set off for the cottage. Edward had skinned 2 of the bulls before Humphrey's return, and Smoker, although he evidently was in great pain, was on his legs again. As soon as they had finished and quartered the beasts, the cart was loaded, and they returned home. They had to return a second time, and both the pony and they were very tired before they sat down to supper. They found the gypsy boy very much recovered, and in good spirits. Alice said that he had been amusing Edith and her by tossing up 3 potatoes at a time, and playing them like balls, and that he had spun a platter upon an iron skewer and balanced it on his chin. They gave him some supper, which he ate in the chimney corner, looking up and staring every now and then at Edith, to whom he appeared very much attached already. "Is it good?" said Humphrey to the boy, giving him another venison steak. "Yes, not have so good supper in Pithole," replied Pablo, laughing. Early on the following morning Edward and Humphrey set off to Lymington with the cart laden with meat. Edward showed Humphrey all the shops and the streets they were in where the purchases were to be made, introduced him to the landlord of the hostelry, and having sold their meat, they returned home. The rest of the meat was taken to Lymington and disposed of by Humphrey on the following day, and the day after that, The 3 skins were carried to the town and disposed of. "We made a good day's work, Edward," said Humphrey, as he reckoned up the money they had made. "We earned it with some risk, at all events," replied Edward. "And now, Humphrey, I think it is time that I keep my promise to Oswald, and go over to the intendant's house and pay my visit to the young lady, as I presume she is. And certainly she has every appearance of being one. I want the visit to be over, as I want to be doing." "How do you mean, Edward?" "I mean that I want to go out and kill some deer, but I will not do it till after I have seen her. When my visit is over, I intend to defy the intendant and all his verderers." "But why should this visit prevent you going out this very day, if so inclined?" "I don't know, but she may ask me if I have done so, and I do not want to tell her that I have, neither do I want to say that I have not if I have, and therefore I shall not commence till after I have seen her." "When will you set off?" "Tomorrow morning, and I shall take my gun, although Oswald desired me not, but after the fight we had with the wild cattle the other day I don't think it prudent to be unarmed. Indeed, I do not feel comfortable without I have my gun, at any time." "Well, I shall have plenty to do when you are away. The potatoes must be hoed up, and I shall see what I can make of Master Pablo. He appears well enough, and he has played quite long enough, so I shall take him with me to the garden tomorrow, and set him to work. What a quantity of fruit there is a promise of in the orchard this year. And Edward, if this boy turns out of any use, and is a help to me, I think that I shall take all the orchard into garden, and then enclose another piece of ground, and see if we cannot grow some corn for ourselves. It is the greatest expense that we have at present, and I should like to take my own corn to the mole to be ground." "But will not growing corn require plough and horses?" said Edward. "No, we will till it by hand. 2 of us can dig a great deal at odd times, and we shall have a better crop with the spade than with the plough. We have now so much manure that we can afford it." "Well, if it is to be done, it should be done at once, Humphrey, before the people from the other side of the forest come and find us out, or they will dispute our right to the enclosure. The forest belongs to the king, brother, and not to the Parliament, and we are the king's liegemen, and only look to him for permission," replied Humphrey. "But what you say is true, the sooner it is done the better, and I will about it at once." "How much do you propose fencing in?" "About 2 or 3 acres. But that is more than you can dig this year or the next." "I know that, but I will manure it without digging, and the grass will grow so rich to what it will outside of the enclosure, that they will suppose it has been enclosed a long while." "That's not a bad idea, Humphrey, but I advise you to look well after that boy, for he is of a bad race, and has not been brought up, I am afraid, with too strict notions of honesty. Be careful, and tell your sisters also to be cautious not to let him suppose that we have any money in the old chest, till we find out whether he is to be trusted or not." "Better not let him know it under any circumstances," replied Humphrey. "He may continue honest, if not tempted by the knowledge that there is anything worth stealing." "You are right, Humphrey. Well, I will be off tomorrow morning and get this visit over. I hope to be able to get all the news from her, now that her father is away." "I hope to get some work out of this Master Pablo," replied Humphrey. "How many things I could do if he would only work. Now, I'll tell you one thing. I will dig a saw pit and get a saw, and then I can cut out boards, and build anything we want. The first time I go to Lymington I will buy a saw, I can afford it now, and I'll make a carpenter's bench for the first thing, and then, with some more tools, I shall get on, and then, Edward, I'll tell you what else I will do." "Then, Humphrey," replied Edward, laughing, "you must tell me some other time, for it is now very late, and I must go to bed, as I have to rise early. I know you have so many projects in your mind that it would take half the night to listen to them." "Well, I believe what you say is true," replied Humphrey, "and it will be better to do one thing at a time than to talk about doing 100, so we will, as you say, to bed." At sunrise Edward and Humphrey were both up. Alice came out when they tapped at her door, as she would not let Edward go without his breakfast. Edith joined them, and they went to prayers. While they were so employed, Pablo came out and listened to what was said. When prayers were over, Humphrey asked Pablo if he knew what they had been doing. "No, not much. Suppose you pray sun to shine." "No, Pablo," said Edith, "pray to God to make us good." "You bad then," said Pablo, "me not bad." "Yes, Pablo, everybody very bad," said Alice, "but if we try to be good, God forgives us." The conversation was then dropped, and as soon as Edward had made his breakfast, he kissed his sisters, and wished Humphrey farewell. Edward threw his gun over his arm, and calling his puppy, which he had named Holdfast, bade Humphrey and his sisters farewell, and set off on his journey across the forest. Holdfast, as well as Humphrey's puppy, which had been named Watch, had grown very fine young animals. The first had been named Holdfast, because it would seize the pigs by the ears and lead them into the sty, and the other because it was so alert at the least noise. But, as Humphrey said, Watch ought to have learnt to lead the pigs, it being more in his line of business than Holdfast's, which was to be brought up for hunting in the forest, while Watch was being educated as a house and farmyard dog. Edward had refused to take the pony, as Humphrey required it for the farm work, and the weather was so fine that he preferred walking, the more so, as it would enable him on his return across the forest to try for some venison, which he could not have done if he had been mounted on Billy's back. Edward walked quick, followed by his dog, which he had taught to keep to heel. He felt happy, as people do who have no cares, from the fine weather, the deep green of the verdure checkered by the flowers in bloom, and the majestic scenery which met his eye on every side. His heart was as buoyant as his steps, as he walked along, the light summer breeze fanning his face. His thoughts, however, which had been more of the chase than anything else, suddenly changed, and he became serious. For some time he had heard no political news of consequence, or what the Commons were doing with the king. This reverie naturally brought to his mind his father's death, the burning of his property, and its sequestration. His cheeks colored with indignation, and his brow was moody. Then he built castles for the future. He imagined the king released from his prison, and leading an army against his oppressors. He fancied himself at the head of a troop of cavalry, charging the parliamentary horse. Victory was on his side. The king was again on his throne, and he was again in possession of the family estate. He was rebuilding the hall, and somehow or another it appeared to him that Patience was standing by his side, as he gave directions to the artificers, when his reverie was suddenly disturbed by Holdfast barking and springing forward in advance. Edward, who had by this time got over more than half his journey, looked up, and perceived himself confronted by a powerful man, apparently about 40 years of age, and dressed as a verderer of the forest. He thought at the time that he had seldom seen a person with a more sinister and forbidding countenance. "How now, young fellow, what are you doing here?" said the man. walking up to him, and cocking the gun which he held in his hand as he advanced. Edward quietly cocked his own gun, which was loaded, when he perceived that hostile preparation on the part of the other person, and then replied, "I am walking across the forest, as you may perceive." "Yes, I perceive you are walking, and you are walking with a dog and a gun. You will now be pleased to walk with me. Deer stealers are not any longer permitted to range this forest." "I am no deer stealer," replied Edward. "It will be quite sufficient to give me that title when you find me with venison in my possession, and as for going with you, that I certainly shall not. Sheer off, or you may meet with harm." "Why, you young good-for-nothing, if you have not venison, it is not from any will not to take it. You are out in pursuit of it, that is clear." "Come, come, you've the wrong person to deal with. My orders are to take up all poachers, and take you I will." "If you can," replied Edward, "but you must first prove that you are able so to do. My gun is as good and my aim is as sure as yours, whoever you may be. I tell you again, I am no poacher, nor have I come out to take the deer, but to cross over to the intendant's cottage, whither I am now going. I tell you thus much, that you may not do anything foolish, and having said this, I advise you to think twice before you act once. Let me proceed in peace, or you may lose your place, if you do not by your own rashness lose your life." There was something so cool and so determined in Edward's quiet manner, that the Verderer hesitated. He perceived that any attempt to take Edward would be at the risk of his own life, and he knew that his orders were to apprehend all poachers, but not to shoot people. It was true that resistance with firearms would warrant his acting in self-defense, but admitting that he should succeed, which was doubtful, still Edward had not been caught in the act of killing venison, and he had no witnesses to prove what had occurred. He also knew that the intendant had given very strict orders as to the shedding of blood, which he was most averse to under any circumstances, and there was something in Edward's appearance and manner so different from a common person, that he was puzzled. Moreover, Edward had stated that he was going to the intendant's house. All things considered, as he found that bullying would not succeed, he thought it advisable to change his tone, and therefore said, "You tell me that you are going to the intendant's house. You have business there, I presume? If I took you prisoner, it is there I should have conducted you. So, young man, you may now walk on before me." "I thank you," replied Edward, "but walk on before you I will not, but if you choose to half-cock your gun again, and walk by my side, I will do the same. Those are my terms, and I will listen to no other, so be pleased to make up your mind, as I am in haste." The Verderer appeared very indignant at this reply, but after a time said, "Be it so." Edward then uncocked his gun, with his eyes fixed upon the man, and the Verderer did the same, and then they walked side by side, Edward keeping at the distance of 3 yards from him, in case of treachery. After a few moments' silence, the Verderer said, "You tell me you are going to the intendant's house. He is not at home." "But young Mistress Patience is, I presume," said Edward. "Yes," replied the man, who, finding that Edward appeared to know so much about the intendant's family, began to be more civil. "Yes, she is at home, for I saw her in the garden this morning." "And Oswald, is he at home?" rejoined Edward. "Yes, he is." "You appear to know our people, young man. Who may you be, if it is a fair question? "It would have been a fair question had you treated me fairly," replied Edward, "but as it is no concern of yours, I shall leave you to find it out." This reply puzzled the man still more, and he now, from the tone of authority assumed by Edward, began to imagine that he had made some mistake, and that he was speaking to a superior, although clad in a forester's dress. He therefore answered humbly, observing that he had only been doing his duty. Edward walked on without making any reply. As they arrived within 100 yards of the intendant's house, Edward said, "I have now arrived at my destination, and am going into that house, as I told you. Do you choose to enter it with me, or will you go to Oswald Partridge and tell him that you have met with Edward Armitage in the forest, and that I should be glad to see him? I believe you are under his orders, are you not?" "Yes, I am," replied the Verderer, "and as I suppose that all's right, I shall go and deliver your message." Edward then turned away from the man, and went into the wicket gate of the garden, and knocked at the door of the house. The door was opened by Patience Heatherstone herself, who said, "Oh, how glad I am to see you. Come in." Edward took off his hat and bowed. Patience led the way into her father's study, where Edward had been first received. "And now," said Patience, extending her hand to Edward, "thanks, many thanks, for your preserving me from so dreadful a death. You don't know how unhappy I have been at not being able to give you my poor thanks for your courageous behavior." Her hand still remained in Edward's while she said this. "You rate what I did too highly," replied Edward. "I would have done the same for anyone in such distress. It was my duty as a man, cavalier," he was about to say, but he checked himself. "Sit down," said Patience, taking a chair. "Nay, no ceremony. I cannot treat as an inferior one to whom I owe such a debt of gratitude." Edward smiled as he took his seat. "My father is as grateful to you as I am. I'm sure that he is, for I heard him when at prayer call down blessings on your head. What can he do for you?" "I begged Oswald Partridge to bring you here, that I might find out." "Oh, sir, do pray let me know how we can show our gratitude by something more than words." "You have shown it already." "Mistress Patience," replied Edward, "have you not honored a poor forester with your hand in friendship, and even admitted him to sit down before you? He who has preserved my life at the risk of his own becomes to me as a brother. At least I feel as a sister towards him. A debt is still a debt, whether indebted to a king or to a forester. Mistress Patience, that is the real word that you should not have hesitated to have used. Do you imagine that I am ashamed of my calling?" "To tell you candidly the truth, then," replied Patience, "I cannot believe that you are what you profess to be. I mean to say, that although a forester now, you were never brought up as such. My father has an opinion allied to mine. I thank you both for your good opinion of me, but I fear that I cannot raise myself above the condition of a forester. Nay, from your father's coming down here, and the new regulations, I have every chance of sinking down to the lower grade of a deer-stealer and poacher. Indeed, had it not been that I had my gun with me, I should have been seized as such this very day as I came over." "But you were not shooting the deer, were you, sir?" inquired Patience. "No, I was not, nor have I killed any since last I saw you." "I am glad that I can say that to my father," replied Patience. "It will much please him. He said to me that he thought you capable of much higher employment than any that could be offered here, and only wished to know what you would accept. He has interest, great interest, although just now at variance with the rulers of this country, on account of the murder of the king, you would or you should have said. Mistress Patience, I have heard how much he was opposed to that foul deed, and I honor him for it." "How truly kind you are to say so," said Patience, the tears starting in her eyes. "What pleasure to hear my father's conduct praised by you." "Why, of course, Mistress Patience, all of my way of thinking must praise him." "Your father is in London, I hear." "Yes, he is, and that reminds me that you must want some refreshment after your walk. I will call Phoebe." So saying, Patience left the room. The fact was, Mistress Patience was reminded that she had been sitting with a young man some time, and alone with him, which was not quite proper in those times, and when Phoebe appeared with the cold viands, she retreated out of hearing, but remained in the room. Edward partook of the meal offered him in silence, Patience occupying herself with her work, and keeping her eyes fixed on it, unless when she gave a slight glance at the table to see if anything was required. When the meal was over, Phoebe removed the tray, and then Edward rose to take his leave. "Nay, do not go yet, I have much to say first. Let me again ask you how we can serve you. I never can take any office under the present rulers of the nation, so that question is at rest." "I was afraid you would answer so," replied Patience gravely. "Do not think I blame you, for many are there already who would gladly retrace their steps if it were possible. They little thought, when they opposed the king, that affairs would have ended as they have done." "Where do you live, sir?" "At the opposite side of the forest, in a house belonging to me now, but which was inherited by my grandfather." "Do you live alone? Surely not?" "No, I do not." "Nay, you may tell me anything, for I would never repeat what might hurt you, or you might not wish to have known." "I live with my brother and 2 sisters, for my grandfather is lately dead." "Is your brother younger than you are?" "He is." "And your sisters, what are their ages?" "They are younger still." "You told my father that you lived upon your farm?" "We do." "Is it a large farm?" "No, very small." "And does that support you?" "That and killing wild cattle has lately." "Yes, and killing deer also until lately?" "You have guessed right." "You were brought up at Arnwood, you told my father, did you not?" "Yes, I was brought up there, and remained there until the death of Colonel Beverley." "And you were educated, were you not?" "Yes, the chaplain taught me what little I do know." "Then, if you were brought up in the house and educated by the chaplain, surely Colonel Beverley never intended you for a forester?" "He did not. I was to have been a soldier as soon as I was old enough to bear arms." "Perhaps you are distantly related to the late Colonel Beverley?" "No, I am not distantly related," replied Edward, who began to feel uneasy at this close cross-examination, but still, had Colonel Beverley been alive, and the king still required his services, I have no doubt that I should have been serving under him at this time. And now, Mistress Patience, that I have answered so many questions of yours, may I be permitted to ask a little about yourself in return? Have you any brothers?" "None. I am an only child." "Have you only one parent alive?" "Only one." "What families are you connected with?" Patience looked up with surprise at this last question. "My mother's name was Cooper. She was sister to Sir Anthony Ashley Cooper, who is a person well known." "Indeed. Then you are of gentle blood." "I believe so," replied Patience, with surprise. "Thank you for your condescension, Mistress Patience, and now, if you will permit me, I will take my leave." "Before you go, let me once more thank you for saving a worthless life," said Patience. "Well, you must come again when my father is here. He will be but too glad to have an opportunity of thanking one who has preserved his only child. Indeed, if you knew my father, you would feel as much regard for him as I do. He is very good, although he looks so stern and melancholy, but he has seldom smiled since my poor mother's death. As to your father, Mistress Patience, I will think as well as I can of one who is joined to a party which I hold in detestation. I can say no more. I must not say all that I know, or you would perhaps find out that he is not quite so wedded to that party as you suppose. Neither his brother-in-law nor he are great friends of Cromwell's, I can assure you, but this in confidence. That raises him in my estimation. But why then does he hold office? He did not ask it, it was given to him, I really believe, because they wished him out of the way, and he accepted it because he was opposed to what was going on, and wished himself to be away. At least I infer so much from what I have learnt. It is not an office of power or trust which leagues him with the present government. No, only one which opposes him to me and my malpractices, replied Edward, laughing. Well, Mistress Patience, you have shown great condescension to a poor forester, and I return you many thanks for your kindness towards me. I will now take my leave. And when will you come and see my father? I cannot say. I fear that I shall not be able very soon to look in his injured face, and it will not be well for a poacher to come near him, replied Edward. However, some day I may be taken and brought before you as a prisoner, you know, and then he is certain to see me. I will not tell you to kill deer, replied Patience, but if you do kill them, no one shall harm you, or I know little of my power or my father's. Farewell then, sir, and once more, gratitude and thanks. Patience held out her hand again to Edward, who this time, like a true cavalier, raised it respectfully to his lips. Patience colored a little, but did not attempt to withdraw it, and Edward, with a low obeisance, quitted the room.
This is the end of part 2. We will meet you at part 3. Don't forget to listen and relax with us.